What if I told you that the real impact of the Middle East oil crisis hasn't even hit us yet? How would you react if I said the chaos of rising oil prices is not the real crisis we should be worried about? I know right now it feels overwhelming. Every hour, something changes. Is there a ceasefire or not? Is a straight off open or closed? One minute it opens, the next minute it shuts again. Nobody really knows what's going on anymore. But the unnerving reality is that it doesn't actually matter whether the war ends next week or not, because beyond all of this noise, there is a much bigger crisis already in motion. This is a 100 FT tsunami, and it's headed straight for the global economy, and it's set to hit Australia and the rest of the world in just 10 days. And I'm not saying this to be overly dramatic. This is one of the biggest banks in the world, JP Morgan, who is saying this, who is projecting this, and they've proven this through one simple map that explains exactly what that tsunami looks like and what happens when we run out of oil reserves while the Strait of Hormuz stays shut. Hey guys, it's Scott here. Now, if you look around right now, things still seem okay. The buses are running, flights are still in the air, traffic is moving, and industries are operating. Yes, there are some disruptions, but the system hasn't fully stopped. And that's exactly the problem. What JP Morgan is saying is that what you're seeing right now is not the real crisis. It's an illusion. Let me explain it simply. Imagine you've seen a massive explosion in the distance. You've seen the flash, but the shockwave hasn't reached you yet. You are yet to feel the impact of it. That is what's happening right now. The shockwave from the Middle East war is actually yet to really hit us. And once it does, there's going to be no stopping it. That's how serious this situation actually is. We're talking about industries slowing down, supply chains breaking, and parts of the global economy coming to a standstill, and we talk global economy. Australia is not immune to what happens in the rest of the world. Now, what you're seeing right now, planes flying, transport running, businesses operating, that might not be the reality 10 days from now in different parts of the world and possibly here at home in some sectors. That's exactly why I had to make this video, because I feel like no one truly understands this. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what JP Morgan is seeing, what this tsunami actually is, how it's going to hit the global and the Australian economy, and most importantly, what it means for you, your money, and the people that you care about. Before I get into it, you know that I cover economy, policy, and property every single day so you can stay ahead of what's happening, so you can make those right strategic decisions. So make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss a video. All right, let's get into it. When people hear the phrase oil supply cut off, they imagine instant collapse. They imagine the lights going out, petrol stations drying up, and the whole system seizing up overnight. But that is not how this works. To understand this properly, you need to look at this JP Morgan map. Take a look at it. Now, these red lines show oil coming out of the Persian Gulf and moving to the rest of the world. Before the war began, that oil that you see on those red lines was flowing normally. It was leaving the Middle East and moving through the global shipping system exactly the way it always does. Then the war starts and the Strait of Hormuz gets disrupted. Now, common sense would tell you that if the tap gets turned off, everyone should feel it immediately. But the problem is oil does not move instantly. These oil tankers are unbelievably slow. They carry millions of barrels, but they move at the speed of a bicycle. So even after the tap is turned off, there is still a huge amount of oil already sitting at sea, still making its way through the global system. And that is exactly what this map shows. If you follow the red lines, you can see that in February, the oil that had already left the Gulf was still moving towards Asia and Europe. It was still on the ocean. Then later, that same oil was still traveling deeper into the system and finally reaching places like the United States, for example. Now, after that, some of those flows go into refineries in places like South Korea, and from there, refined fuel keeps moving further down into places like Australia and New Zealand. So what does that mean? It means that the oil people are consuming right now in a lot of countries is not post-war oil supply. It is pre-war supply that is only now arriving. And even if the Strait of Hormuz opens tomorrow, it will take that oil 4 to 5 weeks to reach its destination. That is why the map is so powerful, because it tells you exactly why things still look weirdly normal. Look at the delivery stop dates shown on it. Africa starts getting hit first around March 20 to April 1. Asia starts losing most deliveries around April 1. Europe is around April 10. The United States is around April 15th. Australia and New Zealand are even later around April 20th. That means this crisis does not hit the whole world at one time. It moves in stages. It rolls through this global supply chain with a lag. That's why you're seeing different news headlines in different countries with different impacts, and you're correlating that with what's happening in Australia, and it's not all lining up. That's exactly why that is happening. Now, once you understand this delay, the next question becomes obvious. If the oil collapse is only days away from hitting us, why aren't governments all around the world panicking? That is because we are in an artificial calm right now, a calm before a possibly big storm. There are three major buffers holding the system together, by design, by the way, and all three of them are only temporary. The first is exactly what we just discussed, which is pre-war shipments, still arriving into the global markets and keeping supply artificially stable. The second buffer is the financial market itself. Oil prices that you see on the screen are not purely reflecting current supply and demand. They are heavily influenced by forward expectations. Even the recent ceasefire announcement briefly pushed prices down, not because supply returned all of a sudden, but because markets priced in hope that supply might return. The third is emergency reserves. This is key. Now, the International Energy Agency coordinated one of the largest releases of strategic oil reserves in history, dumping hundreds of millions of barrels onto the market to stabilize supply. On top of that, certain sanctions have been loosened in practical terms, allowing additional barrels from places like Russia to keep flowing, particularly into Asian markets. But these are only one-off interventions. You cannot keep releasing reserves forever, and you cannot keep bending geopolitical rules every time the market tightens. So this artificial calm that we have been living in is bound to come crashing to an end, just as those last shipments of Middle Eastern oil dry up. And right now, that crunch point is expected to hit within the next 1 to 2 weeks as those final pre-war shipments run out. So when that oil shock hits, it is going to hit us all at once. Now, this is where things start to become much more serious. If the current oil system is missing roughly 11 to 13 million barrels per day, that translates to around 330 million barrels per month that simply do not exist in the system anymore. And every additional week adds to that deficit. Now, at the same time, refineries are still operating, but not because supply is normal. They are operating because they are burning through the feedstock that they already had stored. Once that runs out, refinery output will drop sharply, and then you run into another problem, which is insurance and financing. As geopolitical risks increase, insurers either increase insurance premiums significantly or they pull back coverage entirely. And if tankers cannot get insured, they do not sail, which means even available oil cannot move efficiently through the system. Now, on top of that, replacement supply is not instant. You cannot simply switch on 12 million barrels per day somewhere else overnight. There are political factors such as existing suppliers keeping supply tight to maintain elevated oil prices and maximize profits, along with infrastructure constraints and tanker availability issues, all of which slow down any attempt to replace lost supply. Now, some of you might say, Scott, all of this will happen if the war continues, but what if the war stops tomorrow? Everything will be back to normal, right? The answer is no, because the damage does not disappear when the headlines do. Countries have already drained reserves and they will need to refill them. Refineries will need to rebuild inventories. Governments will want to rebuild strategic stockpiles. Tankers will be in the wrong parts of the world. Ports and supply chains will need to be rebalanced. Now, on top of that, there is physical damage to infrastructure. Energy infrastructure in parts of the Gulf region has already been impacted, and even partial damage to facilities can take months or many, many years to fully repair. Even in the best-case scenario where the Strait of Hormuz reopens, production and export flows can take 1 to 2 months to get things back to normal, and some infrastructure damage could take years to fully recover. So what you end up with is what I'm going to call an aftershock period. The war might be over on paper, but the market still behaves as if there is a shortage. Now, when people think about an oil crisis, they usually think about higher prices at the pump. But the real impact is much broader than that, because when energy becomes scarce or too expensive, parts of the economy stop functioning at the same level. Flights become fewer and more expensive. We're already seeing this right now. Shipping costs rise, which makes imports more expensive. Factories begin to slow down or shut because energy is a core input into production. In the tech sector, semiconductor production gets squeezed not just by electricity constraints, but also by shortages in inputs like helium, which is tied to natural gas production. Fertilizer supply tightens, which directly impacts agriculture and pushes food prices higher. Construction becomes more expensive, which slows down new supply and puts pressure on housing markets. Now, all of this feeds into inflation, and more importantly, it also reduces the amount of overall economic activity. So, the real crisis is the fact that less of the economy can function at the same level. The aftershock effects will be felt for many, many months to come, maybe years. Now, as serious as all of this sounds, this is still not the worst-case scenario. If the US were to target key infrastructure like Cargo Island, you could see additional Iranian supply disappear from the market almost immediately. If Iran retaliates more aggressively against regional energy infrastructure, you could see more permanent damage across the Gulf. If other choke points become constrained, including routes outside the Strait of Hormuz, then alternative supply lines become weaker as well. And even in less extreme scenarios, if tankers are forced to take longer routes around conflict zones, you effectively lock up supply on the water for extended periods, which reduces the amount of usable oil available at any one point in time. Now, at this point, the issue becomes whether that oil can be delivered where it is needed when it is needed. So if you step back and look at all of this together, the most important takeaway is this. The oil crisis that people think they are living through right now is still only the beginning. The reason things still feel relatively normal is because the system is being supported by old shipments, emergency reserves, and a temporary calm created by financial markets. But those buffers will not last forever. And once these buffers start to fade, the real economic impact begins to show up. And right now, with the ceasefire going back and forth, it's on, it's off again. And the Strait of Hormuz still very unstable, there is a very real chance that this transition from calm to crisis happens faster than anyone is expecting. If you found this useful, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can stay ahead of what's happening with the economy and your money. I'll see you guys at the next video. By the way, I generally like to read every single person's comment. Leave a comment. Let me know what you're seeing out there in the real